She was left behind when the wagon train moved on. The cowboy said, "You'll go with me now." The morning began like every other morning on the long journey west. The sky was pale and quiet, and the air carried a light chill that made Clara pull her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had learned not to complain. Everyone in the wagon train was tired. Everyone was hopeful. They all believed that somewhere ahead, beyond the endless land, a better life was waiting. Clara had been traveling with her parents and younger brother for months. The road had changed her. Her hands were no longer soft, her sleep was never deep, and her thoughts were always filled with worry. Still, she tried to stay strong. She cooked when asked, helped with laundry near rivers, and kept watch over her brother when her mother's strength faded. She believed that as long as they stayed together, they would be fine. That morning, the wagon train stopped near a river to refill water barrels and rest the animals. Clara's mother asked her to take a bucket and wash a few clothes while the others prepared to move again. Clara agreed without thinking. She walked a short distance downstream where the water flowed slower and quieter. The sound of the river was calming, and for the first time in days, she felt a small sense of peace. She knelt by the water, dipping the cloth into the cool stream. Her thoughts drifted as her hands worked. She imagined the land they would reach, the small house her father promised to build, and the feeling of waking up without dust in her hair. She did not notice the time passing. She did not hear the first wagon creak forward or the calls between travelers as they prepared to leave. When Clara finally stood and looked back, the land behind her felt strangely empty. At first, she thought the wagons had only moved a little ahead. She gathered the clothes and walked faster, her steps growing uneasy. But with every step, the truth became clearer. The wagons were gone. The animals were gone. The road was quiet, stretching out with no sign of the people she loved. Her heart began to race. She called out, her voice sharp against the open land. No answer came. She ran to a small rise and looked as far as she could see. In the distance, there were faint shapes moving along the trail, barely visible through dust and light. The wagon train was moving on. Clara dropped the bundle of clothes and ran. She ran until her breath burned and her legs shook. She waved her arms and shouted, hoping someone would look back. But the distance only grew. The train did not stop. It did not turn. Slowly the shapes faded into the wide land ahead, leaving nothing behind but silence. She fell to her knees. For a long moment Clara could not move. The fear came in waves, heavy and overwhelming. Her family was gone. Everything she owned was gone. She was alone in a place she barely understood. She pressed her hands into the dirt, trying to steady herself, trying not to panic. As the shock faded, the reality settled in. She was miles from the next settlement. She had little food, no wagon, and no protection from the changing weather. Stories she had heard around campfires returned to her mind, stories of people who vanished on the trail and were never seen again. She hugged herself tightly, trying to push those thoughts away. Clara forced herself to stand. She gathered what little she had, the shawl on her shoulders, a small knife tied at her waist, and the strength she did not know she still carried. She walked back toward the river, hoping her family might realize she was missing and return. Every sound made her turn her head. Every shadow felt important. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher and the warmth became heavy. Clara's throat grew dry and her steps slowed. There was no sign of the wagon train, no tracks heading back, no voices calling her name. The silence felt endless, pressing in on her from all sides. As evening approached, fear gave way to exhaustion. Clara sat on a rock near the trail, watching the sky change color. She tried to think clearly. She remembered her father's words about staying near the road. She remembered her mother's advice about conserving energy. Those memories became her guide. She decided she would wait. As the light softened and shadows stretched long across the land, Clara wrapped her shawl around herself and listened. The world felt too big, too open. Every movement of grass caught her attention. She told herself to breathe, to stay calm, to survive one moment at a time. Then she heard it. The sound was distant at first, slow and steady. Clara lifted her head, her heart pounding. The sound grew clearer, shaped by rhythm and purpose. Hoofbeats. She stood quickly, brushing dirt from her dress. She stepped onto the trail, unsure whether to hide or be seen. Fear and hope battled inside her. If it was a stranger, she did not know what kind of man he might be. But if she stayed hidden, she might lose her only chance. The rider appeared over a small rise, outlined by the fading light. He sat tall on his horse, moving with calm control. His clothes were worn but clean, his hat low against the sun. He slowed when he saw her, his horse coming to a careful stop a short distance away. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. She explained what had happened, her words spilling out faster than she could control. She told him about the river, the clothes, the wagon train that moved on without her. As she spoke, her fear became real again, sharp and painful. The man listened without interrupting. His expression was serious but not cold. When she finished, he looked down the trail, then back at her. He understood the danger of being alone out there. He knew the land and what it could do to someone unprepared. "You can't stay here," he said calmly. His voice was firm, steady, and clear. He told her that night would bring cold, and waiting longer would only make things worse. He explained that the wagon train would not turn back, not now, not for one person. Those words hurt, but Clara already knew they were true. She asked him where he was going. He said he was heading toward a small settlement 2 days away. It wasn't much, but it was safe. He paused, then looked at her directly. "You'll go with me now," he said. The words were not unkind, but they left no room for argument. Clara felt a rush of emotions. Fear of trusting a stranger, relief at not being alone, sadness for what she had lost. All of it mixed together, making it hard to speak. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. The man helped her onto the horse, making sure she was steady before moving forward. As they started down the trail, Clara looked back one last time. The river was quiet again. The place where her life changed was already fading into memory. As the land stretched ahead, she held on, unsure of what awaited her, but knowing she had no choice but to move forward. What she did not yet understand was that being left behind was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something she never expected. The horse moved at a steady pace as the sky slowly darkened. Clara held on carefully, sitting behind the cowboy while trying to keep her balance. Every movement felt new and uncertain. She had never ridden like this before, sharing a horse with someone she had just met. Her hands trembled slightly, but she focused on breathing calmly, just as her mother had taught her. The man guided the horse with quiet confidence. He did not rush, nor did he speak right away. He seemed to understand that Clara needed time to settle her thoughts. The sound of the horse's steps and the soft wind brushing against the grass filled the silence between them. After a while, he spoke again, his voice calm and steady. He told her his name was Thomas. He worked as a cowboy, moving cattle between ranches and settlements. The land was familiar to him, but he respected it deeply, knowing how quickly it could turn dangerous. Clara listened closely, comforted by the way he spoke, as if he had faced many hard days and survived them all. Clara shared her name and a little about her family. As she spoke, her chest tightened. Saying the words out loud made everything feel real again. Her parents, her brother, the wagon, all gone. Thomas did not interrupt. He only nodded now and then, showing that he was listening. As night settled in, the temperature dropped. Thomas led the horse toward a small cluster of trees near the trail. He said they would stop there for the night. It was not safe to travel in the dark, and the horse needed rest. Clara felt nervous about stopping, but she trusted his judgment. Thomas helped her down carefully. He gathered a few branches and started a small fire. Clara watched him work. His movements were practiced and careful, never rushed. The fire slowly came to life, its warm light pushing back the shadows. For the first time since being left behind, Clara felt a small sense of safety. Thomas offered her some food from his pack. It was simple, but Clara accepted it gratefully. She had not realized how hungry she was until she took the first bite. As she ate, she felt her strength slowly returning. The warmth of the fire and the steady presence of another person eased her fear. They sat quietly for a while. The night sky stretched wide above them, filled with stars. Clara had seen many stars on the journey, but tonight they felt different, bigger, closer. She wondered what her family was doing at that moment. Were they searching for her? Had they noticed she was gone? The questions made her heart ache. Thomas broke the silence by asking if she could ride for another long day tomorrow. Clara hesitated, then nodded. She was tired, but she knew stopping was not an option. Thomas nodded in return, as if he respected her honesty. Before resting, Thomas showed her how to wrap herself in her shawl to keep warm. He stayed awake longer, keeping watch. Clara noticed this and felt a quiet gratitude. She lay near the fire, listening to the sounds of the night. At first, every noise made her tense, but slowly, exhaustion took over. She fell asleep with the firelight flickering softly beside her. When Clara woke, the sky was just beginning to lighten. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then everything rushed back. The wagon train. The river, the long trail ahead. She sat up quickly, but Thomas was already awake, preparing to leave. He handed her some water and encouraged her to drink slowly. He said they needed to start early to cover as much ground as possible. Clara stood and stretched, her body sore but willing. She felt stronger than she had the day before, not because the situation had improved, but because she was no longer alone. They mounted the horse and continued forward. The land opened up before them, wide and quiet. Thomas pointed out landmarks as they traveled, showing her how to remember the path and notice changes in the land. He explained how to tell when weather might change and where to find water if needed. Clara listened carefully, realizing how much she had to learn. As the hours passed, they began to talk more. Clara asked about his life on the trail. Thomas shared stories of long drives, lost cattle, and nights spent under open skies. He did not speak of these things with pride or complaint, only as facts of life. Clara admired that about him. She told him about her dreams. She had hoped to help her family start a small farm. She wanted a place where days were predictable and nights felt safe. Speaking of those dreams made her feel both sad and determined. Even if her path had changed, she refused to believe those hopes were gone forever. By midday, the sun was high and strong. Thomas stopped near a shallow stream so the horse could drink. Clara splashed water on her face, feeling refreshed. They ate a small meal and rested in the shade. Thomas reminded her to conserve energy. There was still a long way to go. As they continued, the trail became rougher. The horse slowed, carefully picking its way across uneven ground. Clara felt the strain in her body, but she stayed focused. She thought about every step as progress, every mile as proof that she was surviving. Late in the afternoon, clouds began to gather. The wind shifted, carrying the promise of changing weather. Thomas studied the sky and decided to push on a little farther before stopping. Clara trusted his judgment, though her body was growing tired again. When they finally stopped for the evening, the clouds had darkened, but no rain had fallen yet. Thomas found another safe spot and started a fire. Clara helped gather branches this time, feeling useful. They shared a quiet meal, both lost in thought. As darkness settled in, Clara realized something had changed inside her. She was still afraid, still uncertain, but she was no longer frozen by fear. The trail had taken something from her, but it had also shown her strength she did not know she had. Thomas noticed her quiet confidence and nodded slightly, as if he saw it too. He reminded her that tomorrow would be harder, but also closer to safety. Clara wrapped herself in her shawl and lay near the fire once more. As she watched the flames dance, she understood that this journey was shaping her in ways she could not yet explain. She did not know where it would lead, but she knew one thing for certain: she would keep going. The third day on the trail began with a heavy feeling in the air. Clara sensed it as soon as she opened her eyes. The sky was covered with thick clouds, and the wind moved across the land in long, restless waves. The fire from the night before had burned down to soft ash. Thomas was already awake, checking the horse and tightening the straps with quiet focus. Clara sat up slowly. Her body felt sore, especially her legs and back. Every movement reminded her how far they had already traveled. Still, she did not complain. She had learned that pain passed more easily when she accepted it instead of fighting it. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stood up, ready for another long day. Thomas handed her water and a small piece of food. He told her they needed to move early again. The weather might change, and open land offered little shelter. Clara nodded and drank slowly, saving every bit of strength she could. They mounted the horse and continued forward. The trail stretched ahead, winding through low hills and dry ground. The land looked empty, but Thomas explained that it was never truly empty. He showed her signs she would have missed before: small tracks near the path, broken grass, and changes in the wind. Clara listened carefully, realizing that survival was not about strength alone but awareness. As the morning passed, the wind grew stronger. It carried dust that stung Clara's eyes and made it hard to breathe. Thomas adjusted their pace, leaning forward slightly to protect her from the worst of it. Clara held on, trusting his movements and doing her best to stay steady. They spoke less as the conditions grew harder. Words felt unnecessary. Each mile demanded focus. Clara's thoughts drifted between memories of her family and the reality of the trail. She wondered if her parents had finally realized she was gone. She wondered how her brother was coping. The questions hurt, but she forced herself not to dwell on them too long. Looking backward would not bring her safety. By midday, the wind eased, but the clouds remained. Thomas guided the horse toward a small rise that offered a bit of shelter. They stopped to rest, and Clara carefully climbed down. Her legs shook as her feet touched the ground. Thomas noticed and told her to sit and rest while he checked the surroundings. Clara sat on a rock and closed her eyes. She focused on her breathing, letting the ache in her body settle. When she opened her eyes, Thomas was holding out a piece of food. She accepted it with a quiet smile. Small gestures like that reminded her she was not invisible. As they rested, Thomas spoke more than he usually did. He told her about mistakes he had made in the past, times when he pushed too hard or ignored warning signs. He explained that the land taught lessons, sometimes gently, sometimes not. Clara listened, realizing he was sharing more than stories. He was teaching her how to survive, not just this journey, but whatever came next. They moved on again, and the trail grew narrower. Rocks and uneven ground slowed the horse. Clara had to adjust her balance often, gripping tightly to avoid slipping. Thomas guided the horse with patience, never forcing it to move faster than it should. Late in the afternoon, the clouds finally broke. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. The ground grew slick, and the horse struggled to keep its footing. Thomas scanned the land, searching for shelter. He spotted a shallow dip near a group of rocks and guided the horse there. They dismounted quickly. Thomas tied the horse securely and helped Clara move under what little cover the rocks provided. The rain soaked the land around them, and the air grew cold. Clara shivered, her clothes damp and heavy. Thomas worked quickly. He gathered what dry material he could find and managed to start a small fire, shielding it from the rain. Clara watched closely, impressed by his determination. The fire's warmth was weak but comforting. They waited out the rain in silence. The sound of water falling around them was steady and loud. Clara hugged her knees, her thoughts turning inward. Fear crept back into her mind. What if the weather worsened? What if the horse was injured? What if they could not reach safety in time? Thomas seemed to sense her worry. He told her that fear was natural, but it did not have to control her. He said survival was about making one good choice after another, even when the future felt unclear. His words did not erase her fear, but they steadied her. When the rain finally slowed, the land looked different. The dust was gone, replaced by dark earth and fresh scent. The sky lightened, though the sun did not fully return. Thomas decided they should move again before nightfall. The journey after the rain was slower. Mud clung to the horse's hooves, and Clara's clothes felt heavy against her skin. Every mile felt longer than the last. Still, they pressed on, guided by Thomas's calm direction. As evening approached, Clara's strength began to fade. Her body felt weak and her head grew light. Thomas noticed her grip loosening and slowed the horse. He asked if she could continue. Clara wanted to say yes, but honesty came first. She admitted she was struggling. Thomas did not scold her or show disappointment. He simply nodded and searched for a place to stop. He found a spot near a small cluster of trees that offered some shelter from the wind. They stopped there for the night. Clara barely had the strength to climb down. Thomas supported her, steadying her until she could stand. He helped her sit near the fire and wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Clara felt embarrassed by her weakness, but Thomas showed no judgment. He gave her water and encouraged her to drink. He told her that rest was not failure. It was part of survival. Clara closed her eyes, focusing on his calm voice and the warmth of the fire. Slowly, her breathing steadied. As the night deepened, Clara drifted in and out of sleep. Her dreams were filled with memories of home and images of the endless trail. She woke once to see Thomas sitting nearby, keeping watch as always. The sight brought her comfort. By morning, Clara felt slightly stronger, though still tired. The journey had tested her in ways she never imagined, but it had also shown her something important. She was still standing, still moving, still alive. As they prepared to leave again, Clara realized she was no longer just following Thomas. She was learning, she was adapting. The trail was shaping her into someone new, someone stronger than the girl who had knelt by the river days before. With the rising sun ahead of them, they continued forward, one careful step at a time, unaware that the hardest test was still waiting, just beyond the next bend in the trail. The next morning arrived quietly. The wind had softened, and the sky looked clearer than it had in days. Clara woke slowly, listening to the gentle sounds around her. Birds moved through the trees and the horse shifted nearby. For a moment, everything felt calm. But when she tried to sit up, a deep tiredness settled into her bones. Thomas noticed right away. He watched her carefully as she stood and took a few steps. Her movements were slower than before and her face looked pale. He did not say anything harsh or rushed. Instead, he asked her how she felt. Clara tried to be honest. She said she was tired, more tired than she had ever been, but she could still move. She did not want to stop. She was afraid that stopping for too long would make things worse. Thomas listened and nodded. He said they would move, but at a slower pace, and they would rest when needed. They packed up quietly and continued down the trail. The land had changed again. The ground was softer after the rain, and small plants had begun to show signs of life. Clara noticed these things and felt a strange comfort. The land was not only harsh, it also knew how to renew itself. As they traveled, Thomas pointed out a distant line on the horizon. He said it marked the edge of a valley. Beyond it, the settlement would not be far. Hearing that gave Clara a small burst of hope. She held on to that thought as the horse carried them forward. But as the hours passed, Clara's strength continued to fade. Her head felt heavy, and her thoughts became slow and unclear. She tried to focus on the sound of the horse's steps, counting them in her mind to stay awake. Thomas felt her grip weaken and slowed the horse again. By midday, it was clear something was wrong. Clara's skin felt warm and her eyes struggled to stay open. Thomas stopped near a patch of shade and helped her down carefully. Her legs almost gave way and he had to support her weight. Clara felt ashamed. She did not want to be a burden. She apologized, her voice quiet and weak. Thomas stopped her gently. He told her there was nothing to apologize for. The journey had been hard and her body was simply reaching its limit. He helped her sit against a tree and gave her water, encouraging her to drink slowly. Clara tried, but even that felt difficult. Her thoughts drifted in and out and memories blended with the present. She thought she heard her mother's voice, soft and familiar, telling her to rest. Thomas stayed close. He checked her breathing, kept her shaded, and watched the sky. He knew they could not stay there for too long, but moving her in that condition was risky. He faced a difficult choice, one that required patience and care. After some time, Clara's condition did not improve. Thomas decided they needed to change their plan. He prepared a small shelter using his supplies and the natural cover around them. He made her as comfortable as possible, even though comfort was limited out there. As the afternoon passed, Clara drifted between sleep and waking. Each time she opened her eyes, Thomas was there. Sometimes he spoke softly, reminding her where she was. Other times he simply sat in silence, offering his presence. When evening approached, the air cooled. Clara shivered despite the warmth of the day. Thomas wrapped her more securely and started a small fire at a safe distance. The firelight flickered across her face, and for a moment her eyes focused clearly. She whispered his name and thanked him for staying. Thomas told her there was nowhere else he needed to be. His words were simple, but they carried weight. Clara felt a deep sense of relief, knowing she was not facing this moment alone. The night was long. Clara's breathing was uneven and her body felt weak. Thomas stayed awake, keeping watch, feeding the fire and checking on her. He thought about the settlement ahead, how close and yet how far it felt. He thought about the choice he had made to help her and knew he would make it again without hesitation. Just before dawn, Clara's breathing steadied. The warmth in her skin lessened and her rest became deeper. Thomas noticed the change and allowed himself a small breath of relief. He knew the danger was not fully past, but this was a good sign. When Clara woke again, the light of morning surrounded them. She felt weak but clearer. Her thoughts were her own again, not drifting or confused. She looked at Thomas and saw the signs of a long night on his face. Dark circles under his eyes, tired shoulders, but steady focus. She thanked him again, this time with more strength in her voice. Thomas smiled slightly and told her they would take things slow. The settlement was still there. Rushing would not help them now. They waited for a while before moving. Clara drank water and managed a few small bites of food. Each step felt like effort, but it was possible. When she was ready, Thomas helped her onto the horse, making sure she was secure. The journey that day was slow and careful. Thomas chose the easiest paths, even if they took longer. Clara stayed alert, focusing on staying upright and breathing steadily. She watched the land pass by, noticing details she might have missed before. The way light moved across the ground. The way the horse responded gently to Thomas's guidance. As they moved closer to the valley, the land began to feel different. There were signs of people. Old tracks, worn paths, and distant shapes that hinted at life beyond the open trail. Clara felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. Reaching safety also meant facing the truth about her family and what came next. By late afternoon, they reached a high point overlooking the valley. In the distance, Clara could see small structures, barely visible but real. Her chest tightened with emotion. Tears filled her eyes, not just from relief, but from everything she had carried inside her since the day she was left behind. Thomas stopped the horse and gave her time to take it in. He said they would reach the settlement before nightfall if they continued carefully. Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. She felt changed, not just by the journey, but by the struggle and the care she had received along the way. As they moved forward again, Clara realized something important. The trail had taken her away from everything she knew, but it had also given her a chance to discover who she was when nothing was certain. She was no longer just someone following others' plans. She was someone who had endured, learned, and survived. The sun began to set as they entered the valley. Warm light spread across the land, touching the ground softly. Clara held onto that image, knowing it marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Though her body was still tired, her spirit felt stronger than ever. Whatever awaited her in the settlement, she knew she would face it with the strength she had earned on the trail. As the horse moved deeper into the valley, the sounds of life slowly replaced the long silence of the trail. Clara heard distant voices, the soft clatter of tools, and the low sounds of animals. Each sound felt strange and familiar at the same time. Her heart beat faster, not from fear now, but from the weight of reaching the end of something she never expected to survive. The settlement was small, just a collection of simple buildings made from wood and stone. Smoke rose gently from a few chimneys, and people moved about their daily work. When some of them noticed Thomas and Clara approaching, they paused and watched with quiet curiosity. Thomas slowed the horse and guided it carefully along the main path. Clara sat upright, even though her body still felt weak. She wanted to appear strong. She wanted to feel strong. Reaching this place felt like crossing an invisible line between the past and whatever came next. When they stopped near the center of the settlement, a few people stepped forward. Their faces showed concern and interest, especially when they saw Clara's condition. Thomas explained simply that she had been left behind on the trail and had traveled a long way. He spoke calmly without drama, but his words carried truth. A woman stepped forward, her expression gentle and practical. She offered Clara water and guided her toward a nearby building. Clara hesitated, looking back at Thomas. He nodded, reassuring her that she was safe now. That single nod meant more to her than she could explain. Inside the building, the air was warm and still. Clara was helped onto a bed and given time to rest. The woman stayed nearby, checking on her and offering quiet comfort. Clara closed her eyes, letting herself relax for the first time in days. She did not fall asleep right away. Instead, she lay there thinking. She thought about the river where everything changed. She thought about the endless trail and the nights by the fire. She thought about Thomas's steady presence and the choices he made when it mattered most. Without him, she knew she would not be here. After some time, Thomas came to check on her. He stood near the doorway, careful not to disturb her rest. Clara opened her eyes and smiled faintly. Seeing him there made her feel grounded again. He told her he had spoken with a few people in the settlement. No one had seen the wagon train she described. It had passed through days earlier and did not stop. Hearing that made Clara's chest tighten, even though she had expected it. The final hope that her family might return for her faded quietly. She asked Thomas what would happen now. He did not answer right away. He said the settlement could offer her a place to stay and work until she regained her strength. From there, she could decide what she wanted to do. His voice held no pressure, only honesty. Clara nodded. For the first time, the future felt open instead of frightening. She did not know where her family was or what life would look like now, but she knew she had survived something that once felt impossible. Over the next few days, Clara slowly regained her strength. The people in the settlement treated her with kindness, offering food, rest, and gentle conversation. She helped where she could, folding cloth, preparing simple meals, and learning the rhythm of life in that place. Thomas remained nearby during those days. He checked on her often, but he did not hover. He respected her space just as he had on the trail. They spoke in quiet moments, sharing thoughts about the journey and what came next. One afternoon, Clara walked outside alone. The air was warm, and the land around the settlement felt alive in a different way than the open trail. She realized that she was no longer thinking only about what she had lost. She was beginning to think about what she could build. That realization surprised her. When she returned, she found Thomas preparing to leave. His horse was ready and his pack was secured. Seeing this, Clara felt a sudden heaviness in her chest. She had known this moment would come, but knowing did not make it easier. She approached him slowly. He explained that his work would take him elsewhere. The trail was his life, and it was time for him to move on. He spoke simply, without sadness, but his eyes showed understanding. Clara thanked him. She told him that his choice to stop that first evening had changed her life. She told him she would never forget what he had done for her. Her voice shook slightly, but she did not look away. Thomas listened quietly. Then he said something she would remember forever. He told her that strength was not about never falling behind. It was about getting up and continuing forward, even when the path changed. He said she had that strength long before he ever met her. They stood there for a moment, neither of them rushing to end it. Finally, Thomas mounted his horse. He tipped his hat to her and turned toward the path leading out of the settlement. Clara watched him ride away until he became a small shape against the land, just as the wagon train once had. This time, though, she did not run. She did not call out. She stood still, steady and calm. As the days passed, Clara settled into life in the valley. She worked hard and learned quickly. She made friends and found comfort in routine. Though she still missed her family, the pain no longer controlled her. It became part of her story, not the end of it. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, she thought about the trail and the man who helped her survive it. She wondered where he was and hoped the land treated him kindly. She also thought about herself, about the girl she had been and the woman she was becoming. She understood now that being left behind had forced her to discover her own strength. The journey had taken her far from what she knew, but it had also given her something valuable. Confidence, resilience, choice. Standing at the edge of the settlement one evening, Clara looked out across the land. The sky glowed with soft color as the sun set. She breathed deeply, feeling grounded and ready. Her life had changed forever, not because she was abandoned, but because she survived, adapted, and moved forward. And this time, she knew she would never be left behind again.